Today, the story I will tell is Alcatraz Prison Hauntings, the famous prison in California where the cries of prisoners' ghosts are said to be heard. So let's begin today's story.
The ferry cut through the cold waters of San Francisco Bay, its engine growling against the dense morning fog. The passengers stood in silence, cameras in hand, as the outline of Alcatraz Island appeared, gray, jagged, and ominous. The seagulls circling overhead seemed to cry warnings instead of greetings. Among the group was Dr. Evelyn Shaw, a historian and paranormal researcher who had dedicated her career to investigate haunted sites across America. But this time felt different. Alcatraz, known simply as The Rock, had a history steeped in darkness, violent inmates, failed escape attempts, and whispers of madness that drove men to the brink. It was a place where the walls themselves seemed to breathe despair. "Ever been here before, Doc?" asked Riley, the documentary cameraman walking beside her. Evelyn nodded slowly. "Once, 10 years ago, but not at night." The boat docked, and the group disembarked, the sound of their boots echoing on the worn wooden planks. A tour guide met them, his face pale beneath his uniform cap. "Welcome to Alcatraz," he said, voice hollow. "Please remember, when the last ferry leaves, there's no going back until morning." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. That was exactly what they wanted. They had special permission to film overnight, hoping to capture evidence of the island's legendary hauntings. As they ascended the steep concrete path to the main cell block, the air grew heavier. The massive doors creaked open to reveal rows of empty cells, metal bars rusted with age. The smell of salt and decay filled the corridor. "This was home to Al Capone," Evelyn murmured, running her fingers along a barred door. "And also men who never left. Some say you can still hear them screaming at night." Riley chuckled nervously. "Let's hope we get that on camera." They set up their base inside Cell Block D, known as the Hole. This was where the worst prisoners were kept, isolated, starved of light, and broken. The guide hesitated at the threshold. "If you hear tapping from the walls, don't answer," he warned quietly. "That's how it starts." The crew laughed it off, but Evelyn noticed his trembling hands. By dusk, they had positioned cameras along the corridors and in several cells. The sun disappeared behind the fog, casting the prison in shadow. Power flickered briefly, and a deep chill filled the air. Then, from somewhere down the hallway, came a faint clanging, like a metal cup striking bars. Riley froze. "You heard that?" Evelyn nodded, her pulse racing. The sound grew louder, rhythmic, clang, 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 until it stopped abruptly. The group stood in silence. Then a whisper echoed down the corridor. "You shouldn't have come back." Evelyn turned toward the voice, her breath catching in her throat. Every cell door down the row slowly began to close on its own, one by one, the sound of iron slamming reverberating through the empty prison. And somewhere deep in the darkness, a man began to cry. The first scream tore through the corridor like a jagged blade. It was not human, not entirely, an anguished wail that seemed to echo from every corner at once, bouncing off the cold stone walls. Evelyn froze, gripping her notebook tightly as Riley fumbled with his camera. The others whispered nervously, eyes wide. "It's just the wind," muttered one of the crew, though his voice shook. The truth was, none of them believed it. Not really. The wind did not scream with rage. The wind did not whisper names of the dead. Evelyn took a cautious step forward, the floorboards groaning beneath her boots. She could feel the oppressive weight of the prison pressing in on her, as though unseen hands were trying to push her back. The air had grown colder, sharp against her skin, and a damp, metallic scent, blood, rust, and decay filled her nostrils. The hallway was empty. Every cell was barren, save for the shadows that seemed to twist unnaturally at the edges of her vision. Then she heard it, footsteps, slow, shuffling, but there was no one there. She turned sharply. The sound followed her, halting every time she halted, resuming only when she moved. "Riley," she called, voice low. "Did you hear that?" He was pale, his camera shaking in his hands. I'm filming it. You're not imagining it." A sudden slam made them both jump. A metal door at the far end of the corridor had banged shut. Evelyn's heart raced. Memories of her previous visit returned. The stories of prisoners who had vanished overnight, the reports of screams that continued for decades. And now she was walking in their footsteps, quite literally. "Let's stick together," Evelyn said, moving forward cautiously. But the corridor seemed endless. The shadows deepened, forming figures just out of reach, prisoners, faceless and distorted, pacing behind the bars of cells that should have been empty. Riley's camera flickered. On the screen, a shadow darted across the far wall. Evelyn's breath caught. It looked like a man in tattered prison garb, chains dangling from his wrists. But when she glanced directly down the hall, no one was there. A whisper floated toward her again. "Leave or join us." Evelyn swallowed hard. She had heard legends of the lost ones, inmates who had died in isolation, their spirits forever trapped in the corridors of Alcatraz. Some said their souls were tormented by guilt, others by anger. None found peace. And tonight, they were awake. Then came the first voice that spoke clearly, not a whisper, but a guttural, desperate tone. "Help me." It seemed to come from cell 14, a notorious isolation cell where prisoners were said to vanish without a trace. Evelyn felt a compulsion to approach, a strange pull she couldn't resist. Riley grabbed her arm. "Don't go in there," he warned, but she was already stepping toward the cell. The door creaked open by itself, revealing darkness so dense it seemed to swallow the flickering flashlight beams. From inside, the cries grew louder, agonized, pleading, endless. Evelyn shivered. Whatever had been trapped here, whatever haunted these halls, was awakening, and it was hungry. Evelyn peered into the yawning darkness of cell 14, her flashlight trembling in her grip. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing nothing but the cold, cracked walls and a tangle of rusted chains on the floor. Yet the cries didn't stop. They grew louder, sharper, more insistent, as if circling her, darting from cell to cell, feeding off her fear. Riley's hand tightened on her arm. "We should leave," he whispered, "now." But Evelyn couldn't move. Something invisible held her in place, a magnetic pull drawing her toward the center of the corridor. The air thickened, pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. And then she saw them, figures emerging from the shadows, transparent yet terrifyingly solid. Prisoners, dozens of them, each with hollow eyes, mouths twisted in silent screams. Their chains clinked as they shuffled forward. Who are you?" Evelyn asked, her voice barely audible. One figure stepped closer, its face flickering like a candle flame. "The forgotten, the damned," it rasped. "You wake us." The walls of the cell block seemed to pulse with their presence, as if the prison itself were alive, breathing, feeding on the living. Shadows stretched across the floor, twisting into grotesque forms. Evelyn stumbled backward, her mind screaming for logic, but logic had no place here. A sudden shriek cut through the corridor, sharper than the others. It came from the far end of the block, the solitary confinement wing, known for being the most haunted. Riley turned to film, but the camera's battery died instantly, leaving only static. The screams now surrounded them, coming from every direction, echoing off the stone, bouncing into their very bones. Evelyn realized then, the ghosts weren't just reliving their torment. They were reliving theirs through her, feeding on her fear. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She wanted to run, to flee the island, but the corridor had stretched impossibly long. Every exit she remembered seemed to vanish before her eyes. One of the shadows reached out, a hand skeletal and cold. It brushed against her shoulder, and the world seemed to tilt. Memories not her own, visions of beatings, betrayals, and despair flashed in her mind. She gasped, staggering back. "Enough," she screamed. "I'm not yours." The figure recoiled, and the whispers intensified. "You cannot leave, not while the living walk our halls, not while the sins of the rock remain." Riley grabbed her arm again, yanking her toward a side corridor. "This way, I think there's a service exit." But as they ran, the walls shifted. Cells that had been empty now held inmates pressed against the bars, hands clawing, eyes hollow, faces screaming silently. Every step forward was met with another ghostly figure, another cry, another wave of icy despair. Suddenly, the floor beneath Evelyn's feet groaned and cracked. A cold wind erupted from the open cells, carrying a chorus of voices. Join us, forever." She stumbled into a small hidden room, once an administrative office, now a tomb of peeling paint and rusting files. She pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering, as the sounds of the cell block raged on outside. The ghosts were no longer just shadows. They were waiting, and they were learning. Evelyn pressed her back against the peeling wall of the abandoned office, trying to steady her racing heart. Outside, the cell block raged with a symphony of cries, metal clanging, and whispers. The sound penetrated the thick stone walls, seeping into her very bones. She realized with a growing horror that the prison itself was alive with memory. Every scream, every act of cruelty and despair, recorded and replayed endlessly. Riley crouched beside her, whispering frantically, "We can't stay here. We have to get out before." His words were cut off by a loud, wet slap against the office window. Something was there, something that shouldn't exist. Evelyn's flashlight flickered, revealing a face pressed against the glass. Sunken eyes, gray skin stretched tight, a mouth frozen in a scream that never ended. She stumbled backward, tripping over the rested chair legs as the window cracked from the impact. Outside, more faces pressed forward, appearing in every pane, every shadow, every reflection. It wasn't just the cell block, they were everywhere. The rock was breathing them out, feeding on the living intruders who dared disturb their prison. A sudden memory flashed unbidden in Evelyn's mind, the story of Joseph Joe Stanley, an inmate who had spent months in solitary confinement for a crime he didn't commit. He had gone mad, screaming and clawing at the walls until his death. They said his spirit wandered the corridors, forever trapped by his torment. Evelyn's chest tightened. Joe Stanley wasn't just a story, he was here. A voice, low and guttural, hissed from the corner of the room. "You hear him? The cries never stop." Evelyn turned and saw a shadow coalescing into a figure, thin, twisted, dragging chains behind him. His mouth moved, and the air vibrated with his words. "I was innocent, but they left me here, forever, alone." Riley grabbed her arm, shaking her. "Eve, we have to go, now." But as they ran toward the hallway, the floor beneath them groaned and buckled. Walls shifted again, closing passages, twisting the layout of the prison. It was no longer a place built for the living. It was a labyrinth for the damned. The screams grew louder, more insistent, converging in a chorus of torment that seemed almost musical in its horror. Evelyn felt a compulsion she could not resist, pulling her toward the central hall, the place where executions had been carried out, where the worst inmates had met their end. Something inside her told her this was the heart of the prison's darkness, the wellspring of the haunting. Riley fought to drag her away, but the air thickened, icy fingers of wind wrapping around their limbs. Shadows reached out from the walls, tugging, whispering, pleading. One shadow, closer, more solid than the others, grinned at her with teeth black as coal. "Stay forever." Evelyn stumbled forward, drawn irresistibly to the central hall. The walls were lined with the faces of the dead, every prisoner she had ever read about, every soul twisted by Alcatraz's cruelty. Their eyes followed her, unblinking, accusing. And then she understood. The prison wasn't just haunted, it was hungry. Every scream she had heard, every shadow she had seen was a part of it, a part of the rock itself. Riley's scream echoed through the corridor, snapping her back to the present. The shadows lunged, and the central hall loomed before them, doors swinging open, as if inviting them into the final nightmare. Evelyn realized with a surge of terror that some doors, once opened, could never be closed. The central hall loomed like a cathedral of despair. Rows of cells stretched endlessly, their doors swinging open and shut on invisible hinges. Evelyn's flashlight flickered weakly, casting jagged shadows that writhed like living creatures. Riley dragged her forward, but it felt as if the floor itself resisted their steps, pulling them backward into the abyss. The air reeked of iron and rot. Whispers rose to a deafening chorus, blending into screams that rattled the walls. Faces pressed against the bars of cells, mouths moving in silent agony. Evelyn realized with horror that these weren't just spirits. They were echoes of their final moments, trapped in a loop of eternal torment, and now they were hungry for witnesses. A figure stepped from the shadows, tall, gaunt, chains dragging behind him. Evelyn recognized him immediately from old photographs. Joe Stanley, the prisoner driven mad by isolation. His eyes burned with a rage that had not cooled in decades. "You shouldn't have returned," he growled. His voice carried the weight of centuries of suffering. "You awakened the rock, and it hungers." Before Evelyn could respond, a chorus of voices erupted, surrounding them. Some spoke in sorrow, others in rage, and all in despair. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, alive, stretching and twisting, narrowing the corridor until it felt like a coffin. Riley screamed as shadows lunged, forming hands that grasped at his arms, his legs, dragging him toward the blackened depths of the prison. Evelyn reached for him, but icy fingers clamped her wrist. The shadows pulled her backward, her vision spinning with the faces of the damned. Desperate, Evelyn shouted, "We won't stay, we're leaving." But the rock had no mercy. It was a living monument to cruelty and pain, and it claimed all who dared enter its domain after dark. A voice whispered in her ear, "All who walk here become part of us." Time lost meaning. The cries blurred into one endless wail. Evelyn saw herself reflected in the broken glass of a shattered window, but the reflection was not her own. Her eyes were hollow, her mouth twisted in a silent scream. The rock had already begun its work. With a surge of adrenaline, she lunged forward, dragging Riley with her. The corridor bent impossibly, doors swinging open to reveal the foggy shoreline beyond. For a fleeting moment, they thought they had escaped. The ferry's lights shimmered in the distance, beckoning salvation. But Alcatraz was patient, and it always collected its due. The shadows surged, splitting apart like a tidal wave of darkness. Hands, faces, chains, dozens of spectral forms lunged, clawing, pulling. Riley disappeared into the void with a final echoing scream. Evelyn fought, but she too was dragged toward the depths of the prison, the cold grip of the rock tightening around her soul. Then, silence. The fog on the shore shifted. The ferry returned to its regular route the next morning, carrying tourists who gawked at the crumbling fortress. No sign of Evelyn or Riley remained. Only the faint echo of a scream carried across the bay, barely audible over the lapping of the water. The rock claims all who enter. Inside the prison, the shadows receded, settling back into their corners. The cries of the prisoners faded to a low murmur, as if resting, waiting for the next living soul to awaken the haunted heart of Alcatraz once more. And somewhere, deep in the corridors, a new face appeared behind the bars. Eyes hollow, mouth frozen in an eternal scream. Evelyn had become part of the rock.